Ready? Okay. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Martes Center event, Rethinking the Periphery, European Policy Towards Northern Africa. I think last time when we really discussed a lot of about or of Northern Africa, it was 2010. We all remember Arab revolutions, Arab Spring it was called, and I remember many of these kind of events, lot of enthusiasm, expectations, change in the region close by to us. Maybe it was also because it was just before the EU's enlargement, which at that point seemed to be going quite well, with positive transformation. And the expectation was that same will come to Northern Africa, Arab countries. Now, 13 years later, when we look Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Libya, Egypt, we see some steps forward, but also backslide. We see some economic success, but again, some trouble. We see authoritarian dimension in many countries. We see struggling democracies. So surely that's one of the topic of today, how the region is going. Secondly, as a result of 2010 events, there was a lot of initiatives from the European Union side. Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, Union for the Mediterranean, we remember the huge discussion then about the format and how it's going to work out, and of course the European neighborhood policy, which is of course not only the east from the EU, but of course the south. And this day we are going to reflect how are those instruments, how they have been working, and also how they are responding to the challenges we have and the region has. And of course, we have the question of immigration, and actually that's the one maybe question to us is the problem a little bit that region we see with the it's always crisis and concerns, no? When we speak about Northern Africa, where are there opportunities? Are there some low-hanging fruits which we should grasp? And of course, geopolitics is entering into game. More and more we are seeing, Turkey being involved, and of course Russia. We know the discussion about Wagner. So those are all the elements. But maybe the main point, and one of the reasons why we are organizing also this event, that currently during the past 2 years, and as I'm from Finland, so it's quite understandable for many that the focus has been on war in Ukraine, and for very good reasons. On the other hand, now we are seeing that there's a kind of jump over. In a couple of last years, there's a huge focus also in global politics. We have understood through war in Ukraine that what happens very far from us can have a very quick impact on to us and to our citizens. But what has been maybe a little bit been forgotten, that when we speak about this ambition of common foreign policy, we think that maybe the one precondition is that we focus also, and especially maybe to the regional challenges which are around Europe. We cannot always focus on Ukraine, or let's put it this way, if we want to really maintain the support for Ukraine, we have to then look at the concerns of the different countries. Looking the south of us, Spain has been struggling a lot with Morocco, actually quite successfully, but many times quite alone. The whole question of Libya is still in turmoil. That's a great concern for our southern European countries, but especially for example, for Malta. Egypt, well, that's totally another story. And of course, North Africa, we are not speaking about Turkey and Greece, but that's a classical example where there is one of EU member states have quite relatively strong concerns on some regional development, and there's sometimes the feeling that we are not commonly discussed and shared those challenges. So with this, I would like to thank you for coming, especially the panel, and we are looking forward for our discussion. We have online audience, so welcome. So this is not off the record, this is very much on the record, and I will pass the word to Peter Heffele, our policy director, who will moderate the debate and introduce the speakers. So welcome, and Peter, the floor is yours.
Tommy, thank you very much for your kind words of introductions. Also, a warm welcome from my part to all of you being here and also online. As you pointed out, Tommy, the importance of a new external EU policy towards European neighborhoods, not only to the east, is widely acknowledged, but I have the impression that it's often more lip services and real policy. The situation, I think, is really deplorable. You mentioned the situations in Northern Africa, but yes, it is of utmost importance for European stability and prosperity as well. The big gap between expectations, concepts, and political reality is more than wide, and yeah, you correctly pointed out, and Hassan maybe spoke not a lot of this crisis perspective, which I think has narrowed and unnecessarily narrowed down our view on the regions and excluding all opportunities and options we have. What kind of future true partnership we will create? This is one of the topics we are going to discuss in the next hour. It will be not a very pleasant relation, even in the future. There will be a lot of conflicts and tensions, but business as usual is definitely not what we can pursue for the future. And I think, Antonio, before the European election, I think it's a great window of opportunity for us as a Martin Center to contribute, to start this discussion. And we have to ask, of course, what are more promising ways to engage with the region? How and what has changed in the last years in our relation with Northern Africa? What sources and resources do we have at hand to engage? And these are some questions I would like to discuss with our experts from Europe and the region. And Antonio, I start with you. You are our treasurer of the Martin Center. You are former secretary.
That's protocol. Let's have the experts speak first.
No.
I'm a politician.
Well, I'll keep it very short because also you had been the EPP Secretary General. And what is the more interesting part, of course, is that you are in the parliament, as a member of the parliament, in many delegations which are related to the region, with Israel, for example, with the Arabian Peninsula, the parliamentary center for the Union of the Mediterranean. So you are one of the, I would say, few members of the parliament who is constantly in the region, and this is exactly what we need. I'm very delighted to welcome Imam Khimli. Imam, we would like to have you here on the ground in Brussels, but that you can only join us online is a typical example what went wrong, because you didn't get your visa even after months and weeks of trying to get this. So this is an issue, very practical, and I think we go into these questions later on because it shows what is going wrong with our relations to Northern Africa. But you had been to Europe very often, and your expertise is, of course, in international law and human rights. You've been very engaged also in media and in the civil society in Northern Africa and Tunisia, which is an important factor, and we will be back on that topic later on. Yeah, and Kava, great to have you here. You're one of the most renowned experts in the Middle East, more the eastern parts. You served, for example, in Iraq, with NATO, with other European institutions. You have a long record in research as well as in media exposure. So I think we have a very interesting panel here. And Antonio, let me start with you. And I mentioned also your many trips to the region. If you travel to Tunisia, to Morocco, to Algeria, and talk to parliamentarians and government representatives, what are the topics they are raising? What is their perspective on Europe, to just start with the other side of the continent?
I believe that I have a good relation with many of them because I have a different approach. I call it a southern approach. I don't come to moralize them. I don't come to teach them, like many colleagues unfortunately do when they travel around. That the Europeans, we are perfect, you're imperfect, but we are here to enlighten you. Big mistake. I think that we all have to change our attitude. maybe there are some things that we can also learn from them. I don't know. Second, to give priority to this. Today I had the pleasure to ask directly to Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, about the southern neighborhood. It was a 1.5 hour exposition, questions and answers in the European Parliament. I believe that it was 1 hour and 45 minutes about Ukraine, logically, justified. And then 1 minute to the southern flank, in NATO terms. For us Europeans, southern neighborhood. Of course, poor thing, he had 10 minutes to speak. You cannot speak about everything. And now the priorities is Sweden, the entry of Sweden, I share. The priority is Ukraine, I share. And the question of munition, I share. But southern flank merits a little bit more of time. Why? It was in the past that some of us, very small portion of members of European Parliament and politicians in Brussels, we were speaking about Ukraine. I remember we shared with late President Martens fantastic meetings with, in the transatlantic relation with John McCain, Senator McCain. Senator McCain was always, when you spoke with him, it was 20 minutes, 25 about whatever you wanted to speak, but then he always introduced 5 minutes about Ukraine. He was always, years ago, obsessed, like I am with the southern flank, alarming, advising everybody, be aware, there could be a problem, and finally it came. No one was listening. No one spoke about Ukraine. When the war started, now we have experts in Ukraine, that appear under the stones, everywhere. That was not the case 1 week before the war. So, as well as I spent time with Yushchenko, with Poroshenko, with very good friends, with prime ministers, presidents, working to have Ukraine positively approached to the European Union and NATO, and then, happened what happened. I am a very persistent politician. I believe that we have to do the same with countries in the southern neighborhood. Very different realities, every country, but with one common denominator, essential for us Europeans, our security and cultural also ties and personal ties with many of these countries. There was talk about, some quarrels between Morocco and Spain, or no, relation latest years between Morocco and Spain has always been good. And it's not good for Spain, it's good for the whole Europe. Because we share some common practical also questions, like the fight against jihadism, security, the question of immigration, and also economical, ties. And I think that we have to work on this also. That would be my third approach, positive approach. There are enough problems. Everybody wants to talk about the problems. Let's talk about a positive agenda. And finally, the three actors in the area that are breaking this relation, trying to break in a very subtle way, which is the Wagner Group, China, and Turkey. I mention Turkey because usually people don't mention it. I mention it. I think that our Cypriot and Greek colleagues, they know enough about the international diplomacy of Turkey, specifically defense forces of these two countries, on the constant attacks and provocations. And these desires, dreams by regimes to have back empires. Well, fortunately in Europe, except the British with Brexit, the rest of the countries, we realized a long time ago that we no longer have empires. That, that Europe now, it's a very powerful economical subject, but it's not the top priority in the geostrategical game. Sorry to say that. That we are now a little bit a little bit of a pawn in the big fight, not fight, but the new Cold War between China and the United States. I leave it there because I'm talking too much, and but I wanted to leave also some other topics that could be interesting, Kawa, to discuss afterwards.
Indeed, going back to these geopolitical issues, I have several questions prepared later on, but Kawa, in our introductions, we focus very much on the perception, which is an important issue in politics, how you look at partners or enemies sometimes. It is very much shaped, indeed, as Donna mentioned, by crisis perspective. It's migration, it's energy, it's terrorism. You had been dealing with these issues not only in the western part of the Northern African region, but also in the eastern part, in Iraq and in Egypt, for example. How can we break out of this narrow tunnel? How can we open more options in this respect? You had been on the ground, you had talked to all kind of stakeholders in the region. Where can we identify people also? And this is an issue, ma'am, I will talk to you later on because you are on the ground and you see what are the forces in those societies.
Thank you very much, dear Peter. Thank you also to Tommy and Wilfram Martin Center and Centers, and I'm really delighted and honored to be here today. And I like very much the words of Antonio when he started about how relations, personal relations, is important to engage the region. So I'll elaborate a bit more on that later on. But to start with, first of all, I think what we are seeing in the neighborhoods in plural of EU, and by that I mean the southern neighborhood and the neighborhood of the neighborhood. That is Sahel, which we can't deny. Mm-hmm. So in these two neighborhoods, we are really witnessing rapid and radical, emergence of rapid and radical developments, which means a new neighborhood or new neighborhoods, and which is not always, and all of it is really very promising when it comes to should EU contains with the current policy for the long-term relations with these two regions. Of course, the war of Ukraine, we all know the impact of the war on Ukraine. On the one hand, it has created space for diplomatic autonomy for certain countries in the region, which I think it's good in the long term. But also it has, created a lot of big challenges in addition to, ongoing challenges, for EU's relations with the region. The coups, the latest one in Niger, the coup belt, which will definitely impact North Africa, should really be a wake-up call for EU to change course dealing with North Africa going forward. There is no way that we can decouple these two neighborhoods from each other and their relations to the EU. There is no way. So as I was preparing for this talk, I spoke to some excellent experts in the region. I have my own views and opinions, but I also always like to hear their views. So the first, the first point which came up, and there's a consensus among experts in the region on that, is that actually the previous and current frameworks of cooperation, despite all good intentions of EU with the region, hasn't worked. So we've got three modalities, three frameworks. We've got the Barcelona process, we've got the Union for the Mediterranean, and we've got the current neighborhood policy. Despite all the good intentions, they haven't worked. Why? Well, first and foremost, and if you look at the Barcelona process, neither a common market, right, or a free trade agreement emerged, despite all good intention and leadership at the time. We have to say that, and leadership at the time. Except for Morocco, which historically has very good relations with EU, also institutional relations, and has actually the most advanced relation with EU. But even there, the relations, and this has been established through research, through engagement with experts, officials in the region, has been established actually even there, relations with Morocco, is technocratic and largely transactional. Now, in international relations, transactionalism is inevitable. So there is always a degree of transactionalism. But the question is, and the importance is for EU, is to try to reach a delicate, balance between transactionalism, but also principles and values and long-term thinking. Right? That is lacking at this moment, unfortunately. Right? So the second point is that, which I would like to mention, is, and when I spoke to the experts in the region, is that why these frameworks didn't work, that's the next logical question. There is a widespread perception in the region that actually these frameworks have been devised by the northern neighbors for the southern neighborhoods, right? So it has been devised for and by Europeans. Yes, of course, there are certain concerns and interests of southern neighborhood, which has been included there, but by and large, is actually EU-centric, if you like, right? And this brings me to the third point, that why is this case? Because why is this the case? Policies is always guided by knowledge, the knowledge we produce, right? So the current approach of EU is based on a certain knowledge, which is published or produced internally within the EU institutions and externally. So related to the previous point is that, unfortunately, so far the knowledge production on the region, both in terms, particularly in terms of policy, not in terms of research, there is more advanced knowledge and knowledge production between experts in EU and the region, but policy knowledge is actually EU-centric. It reflects mainly the interest of EU. Here we have the transactionalism, which is inevitable, but there is a need to go an extra mile, right? But we'll get back to that, later on about, what are my key, lessons from my own work in the region. So the issue of I think, knowledge here is key. And lastly, and I will stop here, you spoke, Antonio, very eloquently about a new approach, a positive approach. It's always easy for us experts to first start with sketching the problems, and then I get the answers not only here, but also from my friends, family. What is the solution? And me being an expert, a track 2 diplomat, I would call myself, we always look for glimmers of hopes. Mm-hmm. There are glimmers of hopes, but that we will talk about it later on. But the point is that this positive agenda needs a new visionary European leadership, which is unfortunately lacking today. And it's very sad to say this as a European citizen.
I support this.
It's lacking, but we should never lose hope. And any new approach starts with a new imaginative politics, new leadership. Time will tell whether the next election will produce this leadership. I'll stop there.
Well, the wide frame has been set, but Imam, now having somebody from the region, and as it has been pointed out, leaving the European perspective a bit and seeing what's really going on in the countries. Tunisia was one of those, as Tommy mentioned, big hopes. Well, the situation has not gone that well, but nonetheless, as I know from my personal experience, there are a lot of exchange, intelligent people. The youth is incredible, full of resources and hopes, of course. So give us a bit of an insight. What is currently debated? What are your expectations? Get us on that path a bit closer.
Okay. So first of all, I want to start by saying thank you for this invitation, and I am honored to be part of this important and very crucial discussion. I believe Kawa tried to say it all briefly, and I agree with everything that's been said. And I want to come back on what you said about there is a new neighbor here forming. I know the Europe and North Africa have a natural partnership, and it's been going on for forever because of these both regions share this natural partnership based on a common history and common interests. But the neighbor is changing. So one of the main topics I see being here on the ground that everybody is frustrated with and talking about is either migration and economy, or there is a talk about some terrorism issues. But the main discussion, and I believe this has been trendy even here, is the talk about migration and economic relations. So, as for Tunisia, for example, we can talk since 2015, the agreement on the LECA, for example, for investment and commerce, and how this couldn't lead to anything actually, because there have been problems in this agreement with both parties. Tunisia asking for person mobilities and freedom of mobility of people, which Europe, of course, didn't agree to due to security concerns, and Tunisia being one of the border guardians. And um, and for Tunisia, it was, I believe, the agriculture investments and all of that that was blocked from our end. So what is needed today, I think, is a new kind of agreements and partnership that is based on these new changes in the neighborhood Tunisia and the other countries here. So I think that is the most important thing and urgent to address today. And Kawa, you expressed everything I was gonna say, so you said it all. So, and there are a lot of fields of cooperation that we can focus on today. Um, I believe that's something we're gonna discuss a little bit later. So I'm not gonna go ahead and talk about that.
Thanks, Imam. So the issue of instruments, of approaches, we are going to discuss indeed. But back to both of you, you mentioned the geopolitical framework. And, well, not only towards that region, there's a debate going back to more realistic view, leaving value things ahead, having a more transactional approach. And of course, the other challenge is the fear that we leave an open space, that other forces, China, Russia, Turkey, get into this space. So shall we leave all our values aside? Shall we get purely in this power game? Or is there a specific European approach which differs and is hopefully also widely acknowledged in that region as a different approach than others might choose? Kaba and Antonio.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Mina, for your excellent, enlightened presentation. So, is there? As I said, first of all, EU is not. We should not put all the blame on the EU for structural problems in North Africa. I think it's key. So we should be fair in our criticism. So there are structural problems in these countries which have to do with the history, with the development of the post-colonial state, with the way the ruling elite, unfortunately, has dealt with the post-colonial development, which have not always been, very positive and for the development of the countries. So here, EU is not responsible for it. So we have to be fair. Right? And ultimately, change will come from within. From within. That's a basic rule. So big changes is the responsibility of the ruling elite and the people of the region. And I will come back to that. But when it comes to how to deal with this dilemma of transactionalism and democratic values, how to deal with it. Of course, this is very difficult for EU. It's very complicated for EU. But I think the recent example of the MOU, and I'm sure Emina can talk more about that between Tunisia and EU. That's not the way to deal with that, right? Because basically you reduce this region to one or two topics migration from the perspective of the northern neighborhood, right? And you say, okay, this is a package we have, and we give it to you, and basically, you have to be our border guard. I mean, this is not the way to go. So there have to be some new thinking, policy thinking, not research. In research, there are a lot of advanced, good, positive ideas as how to deal with the issue of the migration, how to deal with the issue of mobility. If EU is ready to have to show leadership, and then to make use of some of these, good ideas in terms of mobility, migration. It's not easy. There are no guarantees they will work, but there are no alternatives to come up with a new positive approach, right? The status quo is unsustainable. The status quo in Tunisia is unsustainable, right? It's unsustainable. It may last for months, for years, but ultimately, big changes will happen there because of internal dynamics, because of the current, turn to authoritarianism, and also because of the impact of some external actors in the region, right? So as one of the great experts from the region, from Tunisia, Hamza Medeb, said that Tunisia is lost in transition. It's neither a democracy nor a functioning authoritarian system. It's lost in transition. How to deal with this? Here we need some positive approach to it, particularly on the issue of mobility. I mean, Amina herself is a good example of the fact that she is not today with us because she didn't manage to get visa on time. I mean, here there is really need for some new approach to it within the framework of the Erasmus program, within the frameworks of mobility, and approach migration from a positive point of view.
You are very much at the heart of the discussions, both in the parliament and the parties as well. There is a critical assessment of many things. You have advised a lot of things, but how can we jump over these traditional frameworks, be it in development policy, in traditional diplomatic relations? Where would you start in changing the tide?
Mm-hmm. Well, we tried in the EPP, accepting parties as observers and partnership. Ayla, correct me, partners from the area. This was a little bit of a revolution inside the EPP. Direct contact between politicians, which is much needed to understand each other. Let me go back. If there is any journalist in this audience, I'm sure will agree with me that the common problem on the center-right political spectrum in Europe is that we lack communication. Okay, everybody says, oh, the right always, center-right, they're very bad at communication, the left is fantastic. Okay, very well. I'm sure that we all agree. This is the motto. Why? Because the center-right, mostly, they are big, there is a lot of political parties, leaders, very different. But the common point is that usually we spend 90% of our time trying to solve the problems and 10% to tell them. The left and others spend 90% telling and 10% doing. That's my personal assessment. Maybe there is a 50-50. Why do I speak about this? Because here we come, Arab Spring, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, Russia, democracy. Everybody is going to embrace democracy. Because, of course, we give for granted that they understand what democracy is. We've seen the effects that they not really. People that they have been living, that they are not so fortunate like us, that they have been living for centuries in dictatorships, regimes, whatever, absolute kingdoms. They have not had the same opportunity, privilege that we have had in this evolution. Because in Europe, we were not always democracies. Let's recall, we are not perfect. But we have arrived to this momentum, and we want to share it. But people, we cannot convert this into democracies from one day to the other. It's drop by drop, with patience. We have seen this also with many countries that have come that they have been for 80 years under the Soviet domination. It takes time. It takes time to change societies. You need also generational changes. And there we came. Ala, venga. Opening of some countries, and then McDonald's, everybody El Dorado, let's do business. And what about the people there? No, they will feel like buying, hamburgers, they will convert into democracy. We need to rethink this. And now that this is over, because there's no longer an Arab Spring, and in Russia we know what there is, maybe it's a time for reflection. Next time that we have an opportunity, how do we approach this? In a little bit more calm. I know it's not sign of the times, it's in politics especially, but in a more strategical way. In the meantime, we have to deal with what we have. And let's admit it, we have regimes. More or less, how do you put it, it's a regime that is not here but not there, And Democrats, we are fighting with one hand strapped to our back. Because then comes the Russians, the Chinese, the others, and they offer everything. Nothing in exchange, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you about human rights. I'm not going to ask you about, your democratic standards. Let's do business. Of course, these people, my colleagues, in Tunisian, Algerian, and Moroccan, and so on, they are not stupid. They know that there is a price. First you do business, and then you will come into the Chinese agenda. Now they have, it was 2030, and now they have changed to 2050, something, or 75, to have the complete control over the globe at the Chinese way. Again, I don't have anything against the Chinese. Sorry for my also little obsession. I don't have anything against them. I don't want my daughters to live under the auspices of the Communist Party of China. That is behind all this economical El Dorado that so many European businesses went there to make business, and they were stolen the know-how, and then they returned crying, and now it's public. But this has been happening for decades. And they go to the Sahel, they go there and say, I offer help, do a group banner against jihadism, and so on. And then you have 8 coups d'etat in 3 years in Africa, 8, with changing regimes and so on, which are more favorable to this new approach. And what are we doing, the Europeans? You said it, lack of leadership. There is absolutely lack of leadership. We are living in the today and the now, and solving the problem of now, and not having any strategical, plan Africa, plan, I don't know, too many plans, but working groups, committees. But what are we doing? I have to admit, well, you were right. I mean, I don't see any right now effectiveness. I'm not a politician that I'm going to cry over it. I think that we have to exercise leadership, and we have to find a way. And I need to listen also, by the way, to solutions. I don't have them. I'm a politician. What I need is to take your ideas and expose them.
And indeed, listening, let aside these plans, the big strategic one, get us to the ground. And Iman, you have worked in fields of international law, in human rights issue. We know very well the potential resources also in the Tunisian society. Where would you start? Where are these very practical steps ahead where Europe can support with a different attitude, I would say, but nonetheless tapping into these resources, which even after the failure of the Arab Springs, still there, and a lot of hopes and talent is there. I'm definitely convinced about that.
Yes, I totally agree. And to come back on what's been said earlier about shared blame for the this partnership not being that efficient, changes should be made within Northern African countries when it comes to governance and democracy, advocating for transparent governance, democratic institutions, the rule of law, fair elections. Also, major economic reforms should be made, especially when it comes to Tunisia and the neighboring countries. Another thing about education, and so in all these our northern countries, when it comes to education in capitals and the main cities, everything is good, everything is okay. But when it comes to the other regions of these countries, there is no clear access to healthcare, education, all that. So these countries, our countries, needs to focus on this. This also will help more about migration issues and security issues and other matters. Um, as you said, we have a lot of competent people here. We have youth and civil society that um, you can engage within organizations or as individuals or in groups that play today a crucial role in advocating um, these changes. So most of today, like especially in Tunisia, a lot of work that should have been done by the government is being done by civil society. So as if it is a shared responsibility. Um, a lot of times there are issues, and we try to address institutions and the government, and they say, why don't you do that? If you have the ideas and you have the funds, why don't you do it? So I know this is very flawed, but also it shows the role that civil society and youth can play in these circumstances. um, so I believe that this should be done from the northern African countries. But when it comes to the European policy instruments, you talked earlier about diplomacy and in its traditional way, what we can do about that. Yes, so I think we still need to shift the focus from the crisis perspective and widen the European policies towards Northern Africa by working on other areas of cooperations, such as capacity buildings and security cooperations. For example, the cooperation between the European Union and North Africa when it comes to security has been crucial in countering terrorism and cyber threats and many other criminal threats. But this also has been many times on the account of human rights and democratic values. So I know some matters are more have more priority and more importance than other, but also this should not make us ignore other facts such as human rights, which has been a uh, very big problem lately. So, for example, Tunisia and Algeria, in their new counterterrorism laws, in attempt to counter terrorism and maintain security, there have been a lot of breaches of human rights and violations, especially when it comes to freedom of expression and assembly. And these problems should not be ignored because these actually are there are clauses that are stipulated within these laws. So they have been like weaponized against civil society and youth and journalists and everybody who's advocating for human rights. So I still believe there are a lot of solutions and areas that we can work on, but what needs to be done is we need a genuine and sincere dialogue between European Union and Northern African countries that is long-term sustainable and that is especially sincere and why not pragmatic if needed.
Tony, in the beginning you mentioned that, for example, the EPP has reached out also to partner parties. That goes beyond the traditional institutions. Because if we talk about the European Union, what is it? Is it institutions such as parties, such institutions as us, for example, the Martin Center? Otherwise, there's a lot of potential also on our side. And I think this has not been very well connected and also tainted sometimes by policy approaches. Tony, what is your experience and where can we proceed beyond the usual diplomatic channels and operations?
One of the successes of the summits of the EPP this year's summit is, for those who don't know, it's like the gathering of the prime ministers with the presidency of the EPP once every 2 months, at the same time, before the Council, the European Council. So where we make our EPP strategy for the decisions of the Council and so on. This has been very successful these years, thanks to this, gathering jackets of leaders, talking on a table with no people around, for 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, so they can talk to each other directly. One day I will publish my memoirs, a long time, and I will tell how many incredible solutions for Europe came out of these tete-a-tete, personal, conversations, without no one interfering, talking about whatever problems, and so on. Okay, it's the same. We need this personal. I believe in the political contact. That's why we started. It was with Joseph Daul, the president of the EPP, who was also enthusiastic about the idea, something that I had been some time realizing that we needed this partnership. Why? Because we needed parties from these countries coming here, sharing with us their experience and also what we are doing here. Of course, this is very tricky. In some countries, you have now special situations, political situations, where you can call it undefined regimes or whatever. In others, there are no even parties. I was even tempted to go a little bit more out in the scope, also to the Gulf countries, to the Middle East part. But claro, you don't have political parties there, because there is another political tradition. And some of them is tribal and so on. How can we adapt to that? Let's be imaginative. Or we are going to impose them that they have to have political parties. Excuse me. Let's think about it. Let's open our minds how to approach them without telling them, you have to have political parties like us. Why? Because during millennia they have not had. They have a different, completely political structure. So let's be respectful. And at the same time, drop by drop, we introduce elements. Now in some of these countries you have parliaments, not very effective, but at least they have, and they are, I don't want to mention anyone in particular, but there are some countries where they are evolving in this particular, adapting Western, kind of parliaments and so on. Of course, it's not like us, but it will take time, and with time people get used to this, and then it will be a fait accompli. Can we help on that? Without telling them that they have to transform from one day to the other? The European Parliament, we make so many friends with our resolutions around the globe, around the planet. Every resolution, we are, of course, it's in good sense. We are asking about human rights, about the political situation in countries and so on, but can we do it with a little bit more of a strategical approach? I don't ask for much. Not to ask to renounce to our principles. No. This has to have to be in Article 76 or paragraph. It has to be. But the problem is, if you want to approach, because I'm telling you, it's a very unjust now situation. Not only in Africa, in Latin America. China is taking the leadership. Of course, they have one person that decides. It's very easy. Here we are 27 and so many institutions and so on. But I believe in this. But we are fighting this in a very unfair way. And we have to reflect ourselves, how do we do more, give us more, a new approach to this, in order for these countries to be part of our, legacy, about our way of life, like Commissioner Maritichinas has in the Vice Presidency in the European Commission, European way of life, not European way of life, but, I think that we have this privilege, this honor. We are an island, isolated island right now of democracy and liberty. We have seen this in Ukraine. Suddenly, the whole European society has woken up. Oh, we are surrounded by very uncertain situations and countries and leadership and so on. Have to do something about it.
Before, and I would like to open, of course, the discussions to you. Give me just a second, because Gava, in your life, you have gone through all ups and downs. You have seen all instruments engaging Western forces in the region. Well, the conclusion you might draw might not be the most optimistic, but still going into some lessons, if I may say so. Where would you start? You started with knowledge, for example. I think this is always an issue which matters not only in this region.
I mean, I am an optimist by nature. So even if the like the analysis of the issues sounds like complicated, complex, which they are, but I think there are still glimmers of hopes, and also provided there is political will here to start a new approach. And when I say new approach,
sorry to interrupt you. I have to be, you are the first one that I have seen, expert coming from foundations and the thinking world that is positive. Thank you very much. Because usually it's all negativism, it's all problems. People, bring me solutions. So thank you for that. So just because I am delighted, because the first time that I see someone, trying to do.
Thanks, Antonio. So I think first point, and I have a couple of points, like I wouldn't call them recommendations, but ideas, which are also ideas from the people I spoke to in Tunisia and in Morocco and other countries. First of all, is related to what Antonio said. Appreciate that transformations take time. Appreciate the complexity of them. I know we live in a crazy, hectic world, but these changes, they have their own dynamics. So appreciate the complexity and don't give up hope immediately when there are setbacks. There are nows, in certain countries in the region, be it in Middle East or North Africa. Don't give up hope on the fact that these societies, they want change. I mean, uprisings of 2011, and I don't say Arab Spring because I'm very critical towards that concept, but that's not our discussion today. The uprisings, they were in 2010 and 11. I mean, it's only 12, 13 years. In the bigger scheme of things, 11, 12 years is a very short time. They need, and we should be hopeful, and I am hopeful. I am hopeful that, positive changes will happen in the coming years and decades. So that's, first is appreciate the complexity and that it takes time. And second, and related to this, when people gave up hope that, listen, these transitions have all failed, I would give them two recent examples, not examples of 2011, but actually now. Until 3-4 weeks ago, the most Syria experts, really the best minds on Syria, and not only a few weeks ago, but it's been the case for the past 2-3 years, they say Assad regime has won the war. It's over with the uprising in Syria. Arab countries, for pragmatic reasons, understandable, they decided to say, okay, let's bring him back to the Arab fold. What happened? For those who have been following the situation in Syria, totally in an unexpected province in southern Syria, in Sueda, people have been protesting for the past 19 days continuously, calling for regime change, but also for international solidarity. And the regime doesn't know how to deal with it. Second example, glimmers of hopes, talking about glimmers of hopes, Iran. Last year, the protest movement of last year, yes, it has been suppressed, but that's not the end of history. That's not the end of history of the end of protest movement in Iran, right? So change happens when we don't expect it. Uprisings happen when we don't expect it, and in places where we don't expect it, right? And then third point is practical ideas, really practical ideas. First and foremost, I think, and I know this is a big ask, but EU needs to have a minimum common foreign policy towards the region. I don't say maximum. I know it's difficult, 27 countries, but there is really a need for a minimum common foreign policy towards this region, but also other regions. Without this, there will be no changes. Because then EU will be happy with its current, like they are doing excellent good work when it comes to support of civil society, to climate change, to education, as I mentioned. And so keep the good things, but without a minimum common foreign policy, the status quo will rule.
And I would like to emphasize it's a common policy because, Antonio, well, we left it to the Spanish, to the Italians, to the Greek, all those who be immediately confronted with this challenge, but it's a common issue. And this is still not, I think, in our minds for many reasons.
And just last, and related to this, EU should also do away with the perception, also in the region, is the wrong perception that it's a cash machine. It's not a cash machine. It's also, it's a factory of ideas, of political will, and people who also want to support. And thirdly, I mentioned Erasmus program. What experts told me in the region, listen, Erasmus program is excellent program. Scale it up, make it a bit similar and larger, as large as the one with Eastern European. We are not asking for impossible. You've got a good program, but scale it up and make it on par with the partnership with the Eastern European. Why not? I think this is doable, right? And last two ideas very quickly, sorry, Peter. First is, you said it, Amina, genuine and sincere knowledge co-production. Now it's the time, as we are heading to the election, for the EU institution to bring experts and activists from the region here, but also travel there, listen to their concerns, their perspectives, their views, and include it in their new policy towards the region after the election, right? I mean, this is the way to go. And they are not asking for the impossible, right? And finally, why not think in exploring ideas for some new forums? And some experts mentioned, like, why not enlarge and bring in the countries of North Africa, Sahel, but maybe also the Gulf countries in some bigger fora. I know if you enlarge it, it will be unmanageable, but also there is a time to think about exploring new frameworks. Thanks.
Well, that's exactly the reason why we started this series, and this is only really the start where our center indeed continues. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's really time for you. Please let us know from which institution, who you are. Keep your remarks, answers quite shortly. We have roughly 15 minutes still left. So I would like to start with the gentleman here, and then I have you two further on. We have microphones because Imam has to follow us as well.
Yeah, good morning. Does it work?
Yes, it works.
I have founded a foundation dialogue between Europe and our neighbors in the European, in the Mediterranean area. We called it in the beginning the Dialogue Nord-Sud Méditerranéen. After our first meeting in Algiers, we changed the name. We called it the Dialogue Sud-Nord. To give a clear political dimension to it, direction to it. And we started it now 12, 15 years ago. At the moment, I'm an old man now, but I want to tell you something of my experience. We try to have civil society dialogue between Europe, and the trick was to find a common subject, like agricultural reform, or people leaving the agricultural area and what to do, how to invest, to give more autonomy to these areas. For some countries, it's impossible. The central government wants to control everything. But drop by drop, people at least meet and they talk about some common interest. It was one of the ideas. But then we came, if we want, they also want to come to us. The visa questions coming up immediately. So how to organize this? It's very difficult. Even the president we have a president in the south and the north, she needs a visa. Now she has a permanent visa, now it's over. How? So we should be more clever, more inventive to overcome these difficulties. And there is a lot of goodwill. We met a civil society organization which are controlled by the Secret Service. We realized this. There was always some of these guys with us. When they have the travel allowances when we made a meeting here, but nevertheless we had to continue, open our doors to others. This is the reality in these countries. Corruption, not to mention, I got questions. How can you help me to sell or to buy milk powder? And then find out that the army said, well, you give me the price and you can profit it. This is reality in these countries. But go on, please go on and give us the tools to do it. Give us also the money. Be open to this. In the beginning, the Commission was very open to help us. For the time being, it's getting down. Now we have some person in Tunisia who is also an Algerian. She wants to do more. I talked to the ambassador of Algeria. He is happy to finance this dialogue. Yeah, I think we should also realize there are a lot of people over there in the Mediterranean. They are open. They know how important it is. And my last phrase: there is a proverb in French: "Connaître veut dire aimer un peu." We have to know each other better. We start loving each other. It's part of that is what. So we come, let them come. We go there and help us doing it. The financing the ideas are there, but we also need, unfortunately, some money to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very helpful insight. So I have the gentleman first, and then I got you on the list as well.
Hello, my name is Professor Linson. I'm a neuroscientist interested in politics. Yes, there is definitely a lack of leadership. I'm reading from my notes, sorry. There is an inability to understand and let alone manage global complexity. What is the solution for the EU? Well, I organized a vast poll on LinkedIn regarding trust in the EU institutions. An independent poll, of course, not an EU system organized poll. And there was an average of 90% no regarding trust in the EU institutions, EU Commission, EU Parliament, 100% no regarding the European Council, and as I said, an average of 90%, including the United Nations. This is a definite no regarding trust in the EU institutions. So there is a need, to my mind, for a fundamental EU institutional architecture revolution. And to my mind, the leader, a new leader that is needed, should in fact be a catalyst for this fundamental EU institutional architecture revolution. I am in fact an independent candidate for the European Commission presidency. I was last time, but we shall see what shall come out of it this time, since I'm rather out of the box. I'm a neuroscientist and not a politician, so we might get somewhere. So yes, well, so my mind, I shall finish there. There is a need for a fundamental mindset, education and governance revolution, or reform if you prefer, in that order, worldwide and synergistically. So this is the solution we are offering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the second row.
Olaf Meyer-Rühle. I am an independent consultant, having worked on international economic issues all my my professional life. I'm looking at not at a North Africa, one region. I'm looking at different, very individual countries with different aspirations, with different situations. So my question would be, what can the EU, whatever institution it may be, what can the EU do to improve the cooperation and living together of the countries involved?
Mm-hmm. So I had the lady now, and I collect all these comments because they give us the opportunity later on to also sum up here on the panel. Please. I'm not quite sure. Can we use the other microphone, please?
Thank you so much. Patricia Santos from CEU San Pablo University in Madrid. I wanted just to thank the panel for this inspiring seminar with the new news ideas that you have shared with us. I wanted also to highlight, following the main line that has been discussed, how long has it taken us to reach our own democracies? I mean, we are here taking for granted that changes can be done in just in 2 weeks. with McDonald's. And it is something deeper than that. And we are here because we have been struggling for this, I guess, that since the Roman Empire. And so that's something, the Roman law. And it is also, I wanted to, I couldn't agree more with that we cannot lean on make-up changes, because beneath these institutions that we share, that we profit from, it is a style of life. And I think that the EU, Europe has this attraction, this has to captivate these countries because the money from China or Russia is not offering that. We have a style of life. We have our own tradition, our own roots. And that is captivating because of the power that civilization brings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, I had two, and please very short, because we have another 5 minutes left. And the gentleman, I think, you had been? Yeah, please.
Miguel Diaz, retired formerly with the U.S. State Department. A big difference in terms of your dealings with North Africa is that you have a substantial North African community in Europe. We don't have that in the U.S. We don't have, it doesn't appear in Russia, it doesn't appear in China. How do you use that asset to change the relationship between the EU and North Africa?
Great. And Aya, please.
Yes, Ayla Hotic from EPP. I have a question to Kawa especially. I would like to have your opinion. We've been seeing that in the media, they've been trying to portray that in the Sahel there is more and more of an anti-Western sentiment. First, is it true? What is your opinion about this? And do you think it could spill over to our neighbors, I would say, so North Africa?
Great. This is a wide variety of topics, ranging from the perceptions, changing really perspectives from south to north, for example, as you described. You mentioned architectural, institutional reforms, approaches, using resources, as you mentioned, communities. I would like to give you 2 minutes each to pick out one of these issues. We are definitely only scratching on the surface, and we had a talk before. This is an issue for the EPP, for example, as well, to continue to provide the elections and the new commissions give us a huge opportunity to really come up, and this is exactly what a Martin Center, for example, is about. But Imam, let me start with you. Choose whatever you want from these very interesting thoughts we had from the audience.
Well, thank you. I would like to answer the last question, and Kawa, you can provide a different answer if you want. But I believe that Northern African countries and the European Union share a special partnership that we are neighbors. So I believe I'm also a bit optimistic as Kawa that although that there might have been issues and there'll probably be issues in this partnership or relationship, but I don't think a lot of this would be affected as in the other areas. And um, and this partnership has a lot of potential to do better and provide better results and consequences for both parties. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, some of the interventions, I think, more or less, I don't want to say, but they were in line with some of the things that we exposed here, no? And I'm happy that we share, some members of the public, this view, no? Please, no revolutions. It's not because I'm center-right and so on. I don't have affectation. No, I would rather prefer a more, approach, another approach. Okay, revolutions generally, I don't think that they offer. You end with emperors. It was a French Revolution, and you end with emperors. So you have examples all around that what we need is to do a strategical, smart approach with the right people. I was, some months ago, I was in Abu Dhabi in a very interesting security gathering, and there was the Chinese special envoy for the Middle East. He started to speak in Arabic. And I turned to a colleague from the Emirates, and I asked him, how good is his Arabic? I said, incredible. And then I realized how many special envoys of the European Union speak Arabic? Not diplomats, not ambassadors, special envoys. Usually former politicians, you know. So, sorry, my little examples, pragmatical, like the one of McDonald's, sorry for that. But these are pragmatical examples. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. You know, there are certain things that we have to change in our approach. I would rather prefer that I am represented at this level by people that I speak Arabic in this area of the world. I would feel more comfortable and well represented. What can we do? Please, no Union for the Mediterranean and all these things. I'm part of the Parliamentary Assembly and so on. It's not going, you said it very well, Kawa, it's not going anywhere. It was a great idea. Good friend, Nicolas Sarkozy, but you know, it's not, it's true, it was a good idea, it was a good initiative, but it has not been followed. It has not been taken, you know, seriously at the end by us, politicians. So, you know, we have to find another institutional approach, bring politicians together, and, you know, and talk about what really matters, that we have things in common, that we have common needs. And one of them is security. One of the factors that always changes populations' mind, security is a key factor, let's face it. In Russia, what happened? Yeltsin, democratic times, started corruption, started wild corruption, wild insecurity, far west in the streets, and then people said, we were living better with the old times. And this is said in many countries where they have had dictatorships before. That is what we have to change. Democracy is tough. Democracy, it means free choice, it means free speech, it means free, you know, that you are innocent until proven guilty, that you will not be persecuted. And it comes at a cost, that you have to fight crime, you have to fight, you know, things that, claro, the dictatorships don't have this kind of problems. They execute, point final. That's why we have to tell people. That's what we have to explain. Democracy, you know, you have to, we have had an evolution. Roman law was said, you know, and so on. Also because, by the way, during the Roman Empire was one of the few occasions that we have a common area, all these countries together. One of the few occasions. Even there were Roman emperors coming from North Africa. So, you know, I mean, there are possibilities. And finally, we need to find the leadership. The Europeans, we were too accommodated. No? We had Angela Merkel solving everything for 16 years. Well, there is no longer Angela Merkel, so people, we need leaders. And this is something that I have detected, not only in my political family, but also in the socialists and so on. You know, prime ministers, they have to be also helped by us, by our support, in order to take the tough, appropriate decisions that no one is taking today. In order to change with that we will stop what's going on in our southern neighborhood, flank, Sahel, etc., not because we are going to change everything, but we are going to do it together with them. Because they want democracy, but still they don't know how it works, how it's implemented, and the consequences of having a democracy. That you have even the enemies of democracy working inside. So, many interesting questions. Thank you for that. And let's, between all of us, try not to find solutions, but at least to propose.
Kawa, I know you have a lot of ideas. We have only 2 minutes left, but we will continue. just pick out one or two. What do you think this is a starting point also for institutions such as us, for example?
Thanks. Thank you very much for the interventions. Very inspiring. And I couldn't agree more with the lady who said, EU ideal is still captivating, and I believe in that. I am a true European citizen, and I think, in my view, and I am a researcher, I am a practitioner, I am critical of certain aspects of the EU work, internally, but also external policy. But my view is that EU is the most successful political project in the history. We have to protect it. We have to protect it. It's not a given. What we have today is not a given. We have to be proud of it. We have to improve it. Not through revolution, but through reforms. And that needs leadership, inspiring leadership. I don't see them around now. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Let's wait. Who knows? I mean, crisis also creates, leadership. So let's not be too pessimistic. And the people of the region, they want democracy. They want good governance, rule of law. Even if they wouldn't call it democracy today because of the flaws of the current regimes, they try to migrate to Europe, not to China. I mean, so why do they want, risk their lives? Some even, die. They want to come to here. So why? So there is this inspirational model of EU, and we have to protect it. We have to be smart with coming new ideas. And on Sahel, and it's a good question, and I would like to paraphrase, the former French ambassador to the UN, Gérard Araud, who recently, the best one who, in my view, who summarized the crisis in Sahel, and he said, you can't have a better diplomat to be critical than the former French ambassador to the UN. So basically, he said, and I think in the beginning the French did an excellent job in terms of counterterrorism, the Western countries, of course. But he said something which will stay with me for the rest of my professional life. And he said, every occupying army, after a while, every liberating army after a while will become an occupier, right? I think this is the key to understand the anti-French sentiment in the region, not maybe necessarily anti-Western, and let's not be also deceived by one or two Russian flags being, raised in the Niger's capital. So, yes, there are people who support them, but there are also a lot of kind of, instrumentalization and machinization there. So let's not be deceived by that. But I think this is the time to also rethink the Sahel policy, right? And the whole idea of counterterrorism, approach, it's about time to rethink that. Thanks.
Well, time and topics for other discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all for this very full contribution. To your panelists. Well, Imam, hopefully next time being here on the ground, having solved these odds. This is a topic which just started by today. We use the opportunity of the elections and the midterm perspectives to develop these kind of concepts. So stay please with us in our events, on our publications, our formats we are going to develop. I hope to see you soon. I would like also to thank my dear colleague Katharina, who managed to organize this issue. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. There's lunch out there, so stay with us. Networking is an important part of our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.